Today, I am going to give talk number 2 on depression and resiliency. And I want to stress resiliency because it would be downright foolish to just talk about depression if there wasn't a way out, so to speak. So I want to review just a little bit about what depression is. My last talk, I used this definition from the American Psychiatric Association. Quote, depression is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. Depression causes feelings of sadness and or loss of interest in activities you once enjoyed. It can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and can decrease your ability to function at work and at home. And from Trollag Rinpoche, quote, when we suffer from depression, our energy levels and motivation go down, and we become withdrawn, uncommunicative, irritable, resentful, and basically very difficult to be with. So moving on from there, I thought and excuse me, I've got some kind of a cold in my throat and chest, and I'm going to probably have to cough every once in a while. I'm going to, I thought I would start this talk by a little bit of my own experience. And now, for most of my life before the age of 40, I didn't really know much about depression or even that I could have it. But on the other hand, looking back now, I probably had mild depression most of my life because of various factors, including a traumatic childhood. Now, once I got to understand depression, and you might say make friends with the depression, that or even actually the path that led to making friends with it and understanding it was to stop always looking outward and start looking inward. But when you have depression, it's very painful to look inward because you're having very painful thoughts, very painful memories, and so on and so forth. And you, while you may be looking in, you don't want to be aware of that's what you're doing. What I found was that I was cherry picking, you might say, my memories of painful experiences that I had, painful thoughts, negative things, and so forth. And that I was making lots of comparisons with others. I was trying to prove myself to be worthy because I felt unworthy. And there was just this plain underlying sadness all the time. Life is unfair. I wasn't as good as others. I didn't appreciate what other people did for me. And there was an element of anger too. And there were other parts too. And I can't say that everybody's depression is going to be exactly like mine, but the point is that when I finally looked inward and started examining it, I found that depression was not solid. That depression was not like just this huge blackness, or for an analogy, like a big solid rock, that it was made out of parts, and the parts had pieces, and the pieces had smaller pieces. This is what's called interdependence. I didn't see this all at once, but gradually I started to see this, and that to work with depression, if you see it as solid, then it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to work with. But if you can start working with parts, or even pieces of the parts, or pieces of the parts, that little by little it becomes workable. Again, in my own instance, and I'm not saying that everybody's depression is going to be exactly the same, but I found that it had two elements to it, and that was anger. And the anger was especially towards myself, but it was frequently directed to other people. And then laziness. And when I started studying Buddhism, I was amazed at first. And secondly, felt really fortunate, because in Buddhism, there are three types of laziness. And I kind of recognized all three of them in myself. And so the three types of laziness that are in Buddhism are, I'll use the words couch potato for the first one, and that is you sleep a lot. And when you're up, you might end up on the couch sleeping, or watching the TV and maybe dozing off. When you wake up, when you have this kind of laziness, you start thinking long before you get up. You start thinking about what needs to be done this day that you just woke up to, and you just go over and over and over, and all the things that need to be done seem so overwhelming that you decide that you better sleep, go back to sleep and get more rest, so you've got strength to handle all of this, or so you can pretend it's not there and deny it. Whatever reason, you have a little hard time getting out of bed, even with this kind of laziness. Another form of laziness is self-deprecation. And that is thinking, I'm not capable of doing that, so why even try? I'll never finish it. I'll never complete it. What's the point? And you might compare yourself to others and say, well, others can, but not me. They're different than me, or I'm different than them. And then, very simply put, a very common form of self-deprecation is yes, but, and you've always got this but, and it's an excuse as to why you just could not possibly do that. And the third form of laziness that is mentioned in Buddhism is compulsive busyness, doing things that aren't so important. Well, you are avoiding doing what is important. In terms of depression, as well as the workplace, it might be the attitude, if it's not working, so let's do more of it. Put more energy into doing it. If we just do enough, it'll finally work. And also it's a kind of busyness where it's really more distraction, distracting you from doing what needs to be done, and perhaps even distracting you from working on your depression. Well, there are remedies for all of this, and I'll go over that briefly. The obvious remedy for anger is loving kindness. And so it's really important to learn how to have loving kindness for yourself, to feel that you are worthy of being loved unconditionally by yourself. This is the classic remedy for anger. But when you're depressed and the anger is pointed at yourself, then you need to start with yourself. And it's not self-indulgent to love yourself and start loving yourself. It might be difficult. It might seem odd. And it might seem like, no, I'm supposed to be liberating all sentient beings and having compassion for all sentient beings. But the point is that if you don't love yourself, you really don't know what love is, and you really can't love other beings. So it's very important to love ourselves, and as we develop the ability to love ourselves, and it becomes stronger and stronger, then we can spread it around to other beings. And the basic remedy for laziness is diligence. Just do it. The classic example is if you're sitting there and a poisonous snake falls in your lap, do you think about it, or do you get up and get away? That kind of just do it. And of course, you don't have to start with doing the big things. It's fine if you're working with depression to start with the little things, the things that are easier to do, easier to complete more completed more quickly, and so forth. And if you're having a hard time getting out of bed, well, take a book you like that has a positive message. If you have a book that has a positive message that you like, and read it in bed. Do something fun in bed. What came to mind would be these coffee table books. But anyway, and in fact, here's a story about a friend of mine that I don't think he necessarily was suffering from depression, but he was definitely suffering from mental illness. And actually what this story is about mindfulness and doing the little things. And so he was institutionalized, and he just let himself go. And then for some reason, it was perhaps his Buddha nature, but for some reason, one day he decided to start washing his face. And then he, after doing that for a while, he started to bathe, and then he started to comb his hair. Then he started to brush his teeth. And just by taking care of all these little things, little by little, adding more and more, he suddenly got to the point where they released him. And he never went back. In fact, I even gave this advice to a man that came to me, one of my students that was depressed. And I said, I'll bet your house is a mess. And he said, yes, he lived alone. And I said, well, tomorrow when you get up, take out the trash. And then little by little, add more things to what you do. The same kind of strategy. Now, for self-esteem, this can be difficult, but you need to develop trust in yourself. It's really good to contemplate Buddha nature, to read about it, try to understand it. Sometimes it's called primordial goodness. Again, work on having more loving kindness, unconditional loving kindness towards yourself, instead of mulling over all the bad things that you have done. Start thinking about things that you have done that have been beneficial. I came across a saying, a Tibetan woman told me this a number of years ago, and that was, if you have a warm spot in your heart for yourself, you will be comfortable wherever you go. And so part of this self-esteem is developing a warm spot in your heart for yourself. And another point is, and this shows how these things are all interdependent. And when we're angry at ourselves, when that monkey mind is continually giving us messages that are angry messages about ourselves, of course, we're going to have low self-esteem. So be mindful of that monkey mind and the messages that it's giving you. I'm going to go into these things in more detail later on. This is kind of giving you an introduction. So now I want to explain, and I may have done this the last time too, um, what emotions are, or our afflictive states of mind, and what moods are. So first of all, emotions are based on taking that which is not a self to be a self, and that which is not other to be other. And starting from that, then we have this ego, or this idea of a self, and it sees other as either being pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, and then develop, if it's pleasant, wanting to have more of it or get closer. If it's unpleasant, wanting to get away and having less of it. And if it's neutral, just, yeah, don't care. And so we have anger is what we find unpleasant. We have desire for what is pleasant. We have indifference and ignorance towards things that we're neutral about. And then jealousy for other, if we feel the other has a better deal than we do. And then arrogant when we feel that we have the best deal. And interestingly enough, that these afflictive states of mind, or kleshas, they're not even pure, they're mixed. That arrogance is frequently, if not always, mixed with a feeling of inferiority. And that's why you feel you have to be arrogant, because underneath it, you feel that you're inferior to other rather than better. And jealousy can be mixed with anger. Love can be mixed with resentment and anger, and desire can be mixed with jealousy, and so on and so forth. So it gets pretty complicated. But these emotions come and go. They're not, you might say, constant. They're like waves on the ocean, frequently big waves on the ocean. Now, moods are different than that. Moods are different from emotions in three areas. One, moods tend to be much more long-lasting. They last for hours or days, whereas emotions may only last for a few minutes. Emotions are about specifics, but moods they're more diffuse than that, and they don't have, you might say, an identifiable object. So mood is a general feeling rather than a reaction to a specific situation or a memory, and so forth. And the third point is that moods aren't as intense as emotions. That you can have strong emotions, but your moods are weaker than that and more in the background. We can have good moods, we can have bad moods, and so forth. But these moods depend on, or they reflect how we respond to situations. Reason that I bring this up is that depression is a state of being in a particular negative mood of one sort. And there are a number of different negative moods, but it's a negative mood. And then emotions come from that mood. So if you're in a bad mood, your emotions tend to be angry, sad, fearful, and so forth. But if you're in a good mood, you are probably going to be having positive emotions, such as being happy, having having some hope, or thinking that things are going to work out, as opposed to being overcome by fear, which being in a bad mood can cause. So if we look at the emotions that we have, this will give you an idea of what kind of mood you are in. And I will say this, when I was depressed, for some reason or another, I decided to keep a journal, and I had never done that before in my whole life. And I had never done it after that either. And it was amazing when I went and reread what I had written down. I don't know, it might have been 2 or 3 months worth, but it was basically reruns. The same thing week after week, month after month. And I don't know, if you have, if you do that, you might learn a lot about your monkey mind and what sorts of things are going on in it, and how it is the same old, same old. Now, emotions are conceptual. They are made up of thoughts, memories, and so forth. And also moods. So one way to work with our moods, our depression, and so forth is to look at our thoughts and then let go of them. And since moods are not as intense as emotions, if we can see them, if we become aware of them, they can actually be easier to work with because they're not as strong. When anger arises, it gets very strong and it gets very difficult to control. It's controlling us. But if we're in a bad mood and we become aware of it, then we can start looking at the thoughts that are causing the bad mood and work with those thoughts. So moods, as I said, because they're more diffuse and aren't as strong, they are more like, to our perception, more like air, or let's say darkness at night. This is the way things are, and we don't see anything special or that um, that this is different or unusual. It is very normal from our perspective if we are in a bad, depressed mood, and it has been going on for a long time. In fact, we might even think that the reason why other people aren't depressed is because they just aren't as smart as me and just don't see things as clearly as I see it. Actually, this is one good aspect of depression, by the way, and that is if it is actually a result of you seeing the futility of samsara. Because if that is what is happening, and you can really get a good grasp of this, what samsara is, and yes, it is futile, that can really help you let go and spend more time on doing practice to escape from samsara. So that is also a good side of depression if you can work with it that way. But anyway, the technique is to work with our moods and our emotions. And an analogy that I use is that if you find that you are just feeling down, feeling sad, in a bad mood, and so on and so forth, that is an indicator that it's time for you to look within at your thoughts. What are you thinking right now? What memories are you having? What are your assumptions, your conceptions, and so forth, judgments? And when you find what it is that you're dwelling on right at this moment, let go of it. Realize that this is the reason why I am having this negative mood right now, or this negative emotion, and just let go of it. Or you could start repeating mantra. You might say, change the topic. And if the thoughts that cause the negative mood, the negative emotions are gone, the mood will at least lighten up. And the better you get at it, the more that mood will lighten up and even transform into a good mood. And so it's really important to look at what's going on in our mind. You could call it mindfulness. And so from time to time, when you find that you are having you might say a bad day, just seeing a lot of negativity, feeling like you're not having much joy, that life has got you down and so forth, that is the time to look see what thoughts you're having, and then let go of them, and if necessary, replace them with positive thoughts, as I said, like mantra. But it could also be thinking about what you have gratitude for, how other people have benefited you in various ways. As I was preparing this talk, I was thinking it's a bit like you're at home and you've got a closet where you throw everything that is, let's just say it's, you don't use it, but you can't part with it. And so now you open up that closet door and you get a box and you start putting the stuff in the box and throw it out. Here, though, we don't visualize a box, we just let go of it. I am going to talk about one more thing, and then I will open it up to question and answers. So if it is thought that is causing us to have these bad moods, feeling down and depressed, angry at ourselves, angry at others, staying in bed, well, we go over and over in our minds all the things that we've done wrong in life and all the things that we have to do today. And when it seems overwhelming and so forth. Well, the important thing is to understand the nature of thought. And very simply, the nature of thoughts is that thoughts come and go. They come into our mind, they dwell there for a while, and then they disappear. That the nature of thoughts is actually emptiness. To put it another way, our thoughts aren't real. That if our thoughts were real, then when you were hungry, all you would need to do would be to think about a wonderful meal you had some Thanksgiving, and you ate and ate and ate that day, and were absolutely stuffed, perhaps overstuffed. So if your thoughts were real, all you would have to do to satisfy your hunger is to think about that meal over and over and over again, and no problem. But of course, the more you would think about that, the hungrier you would get. Because these thoughts, these memories are not real. They cannot satisfy your hunger. And so we get very tied up in thoughts that aren't real, while we are thinking that they are real. And then the problem is that we act on these thoughts that aren't real, and then we do things that have consequences that we have to experience. So it's really important to understand that our thoughts are not real. When we have a frightening thought, it is nothing but thought. it might be good to pay attention to why you are having frightening thoughts. For instance, uh, standing in the middle of I-94. Yeah, when you have a thought that says, don't do this, that's helpful. But no matter how much you think about standing in the middle of I-94, you will never be hit by a car as long as you don't act on that thought. So when we're looking at these negative thoughts, these painful memories, our attitudes towards ourselves and so forth, it's really important to understand that these are just thoughts and they're not real. And since they're not real, it's no problem letting go of them. If they were real, then it would be a real problem. And of course, if it's real, it's permanent, and then there would be nothing you could do about it. You would be permanently depressed. You would be permanently thinking about what a bad person you are, permanently angry at yourself, permanently in a bad mood, and so on and so forth. So it is really very, very important to understand that our thoughts, they come and go. Meditation can really help us understand this better by watching our minds, watching our thoughts come and go in our minds, and so forth. Now, the final point that I want to talk about has to do with resiliency and bringing ourselves out of depression. And that is that two factors that have a great impact on depression or any negative mood is the first one is what's called cognitive reactivity. And that is how reactive we are to our thoughts and our emotions. And a person that is resilient, they will experience strong emotions, they will experience negative thoughts, but it doesn't cause them to, you might say, lose their emotional balance. Chogyam Trungpa would use the example of riding a horse, that horses, even a trained horse, sometimes will spook and suddenly move to one side or the other. And a person that is well trained at riding a horse will not fall off. They might, their balance might deteriorate considerably, but they remain on top of the horse. Whereas a person that isn't as well trained ends up on the ground. So this reactivity is like that, the person that is very reactive when something strong comes up, it throws them off. They lose their grounding, and they're carried away by the strong emotion. And it's very difficult for them to, you might say, get back on the horse and regain their balance. The other is rumination. And now rumination is a word that's used a lot in the part of the country that I come from, because that's what cows do. They have two stomachs. They chew their hay, grass, or whatever else they eat, and then it goes into their first stomach. And then when they've got time, they regurgitate that, and then chew it and chew it and chew it and chew it, and then swallow it, and it goes into their second stomach. And so rumination here is very similar to that, is that you have a memory, an emotion, an experience, and later on, then you bring it up and you chew on it and chew on it and chew on it over and over and over again. And what this does is it just magnifies the negativity. You can't put it down. You have to, it's like a soap opera, but reruns of a soap opera, the same reruns, hour after hour after hour, day after day after day. That's kind of one of the things that I learned when I kept a journal, was that it was reruns of a soap opera, and it certainly had no, what would I say? It had no significant value at all, other than for me to be aware of how stuck I was and how I needed to let go of all of that I was experiencing day after day after day after day. Well, needless to say, rumination just makes depression worse. It just compounds things. And so when you see that you are ruminating, realize that you are ruminating, that's the time to let go. And I think I said two, there's actually a third point here, which is closely related, and it is over focusing. That we take one thing or one group of things that are relatively unimportant or small, and then we zoom in on it and give it tremendous importance. It may be something that we did, and we're supposed to be perfect, and we made a mistake. And we go over and over and over in our minds about how serious a mistake this was, how it made us look like an idiot, how I am an idiot is not a matter of looking like an idiot, I am an idiot, and so on and so forth. But that could be anything. So it's good to be aware of these things. The way to work with depression successfully is actually get to know it. And then it teaches you a lot, and it becomes your friend and ally rather than becoming an adversary. With that, I would like to open it up to questions and answers. The question is about dharmic laziness. How can we learn to spend more time with our Dharma practice when it seems like our lives are just full of things to do and there's not much room for Dharma in this already busy life? Now, this is where the thought about the futility of samsara comes in, that if you look, the things that we busy ourselves with, at the very least, will all be left behind at the time of death. That ultimately they have very little meaning. On the other hand, this is right now in the 21st century, there is so much to do, so much available to do. All you have to do is get on your cell phone or your laptop, and you can spend the rest of your life there. You can be busy doing anything and everything. My particular form of this type of laziness was collecting and restoring antique tractors. Now, they had a value. It wasn't like this was totally valueless in terms of money, but it was pretty much totally valueless in terms of Dharma and what was important in life. And so it is really good to think about what really is important in life, especially when you look at the fact that all of us will be dead at some point, hopefully a long time away. But at the time of death, we're taking nothing with us. And now I separated from my wife, former wife. There was a divorce. We had an auction. And I was amazed at how other people did not value my personal property that I was putting up for sale like I valued my personal property. I spent a lot of time cleaning things up, organizing, putting things on tables, and the auctioneer would just go right by them, and it was like, don't think that your possessions, your household possessions at least, are worth a lot. And if you have kids or grandkids, they're probably going to say, I don't want this stuff. They'll probably take it to the Goodwill. And Karmapa has said that the best approach to life is simplicity. It's difficult in our world because our world is built on just one complicated thing after another. But if you can simplify your life even a little bit, if you can get pleasure out of doing simple things. Again, an example, before I started collecting, well, actually during the time that I was collecting tractors, I also had horses here. Was in a saddle club. My wife and I would go on trail rides. We would ride in local parades and so forth. And it was nice working with the horses, riding the horses and so forth. But I came to realize that for every hour I was on a horse, there were countless hours that I was involved in baling hay, feeding the horses, cleaning their manure, worming them, grooming them, and on and on and on. And it was like, there are easier ways to be happy, much easier ways to be happy. And so contemplate what it is that you're doing that is keeping you so busy, and then try to simplify and cut down and make, and it isn't an all or nothing. We don't have to be Milarepas, sell all our property and then go live in a cave, but try to simplify our lives a little bit and spend a little more time practicing, because that will go with us when we leave our body behind. The question is that in the beginning of the talk, I mentioned breaking things down into parts and pieces. And what I meant was that depression feels solid. It feels like it is just this big thing that you can't work with. You can't get around it. You can't go over it. You can't go through it. It's just this big thing that is much stronger than you are. But if we look at depression, as I said, in my case, it had this aspect of anger towards myself, and it had an aspect of laziness, and 3 different types of laziness. And so already we've got 4 parts. And then if you start looking at the anger towards yourself, it has parts. It's not just one thing, it has parts. One technique that I developed was to start at least laughing occasionally when I would see how I was being angry at myself for not being perfect, for making a mistake. Oh my gosh, I made a mistake. I am a terrible person, and I could be beating myself up for days, weeks. I can bring up things, 10 years in the past. And a friend of mine at this time, as a joke, gave me it was probably a computer printout. And this was back in about 1987 or 88. And it said the beatings will continue until morale improves. And in little letters, the management. And, he thought this was really silly. And I realized that this was my self-improvement program that I had been engaging in for 40-something years. And I hung that up on my bulletin board. In fact, I had a friend stop by last week that knew me at that time, and he noted A, that the sign was no longer on my bulletin board, and B, how he was surprised to see it the first time. But the point was that eventually I would see that sign on the bulletin board and kind of go, this is really silly. Maybe laugh a little bit and lighten up, because really that's what anger towards ourselves is. It's a self-improvement program of, if I just beat myself up enough, I'll be better. I won't make mistakes. And if you just beat yourself up enough, you just get more depressed. It doesn't work. If for instance, can imagine a diet, a diet program that you would go on, being that you just look at yourself in the mirror and start talking about how you're just a fat slob and you look ugly, yada, yada, yada. You think you're going to lose weight? You're probably going to eat more food to cover up how miserable you're feeling. The question or observation, as much as a question, was that, well, there are other people out there that I interact with that they can be very difficult people to work with, that they have their own issues and perhaps anger that comes to mind. Right now, we have this pandemic, and it seems to have really ratcheted up the social thermometer, so to speak. I actually saw a short video by probably a psychiatrist, and he was saying that these incidents where people just start attacking someone at Walmart that's passing out masks, that they're having a temper tantrum, that this has stressed them out so much that they're acting like a 6-year-old. And you can't rationally have a discussion with a person having a temper tantrum acting like a 6-year-old. You also can't say, go sit in the corner and cool off. They don't like that. But the point is that a lot of times it's best to just not say anything and get away. You don't have to agree with them. I can't say that I always have a skillful answer, but a good answer, if you're fast, is okay, which indicates that you have heard them, you're acknowledging them, but you're not agreeing with them. But expecting to have a logical conversation with them is, in many cases these days, not going to happen and unrealistic.